This is The Joe Gaither Show on BamaCentral.com.
Good afternoon, Tuscaloosa, Internet World, West Alabama. How are we doing today on a Thursday? It's the Joe Gaither Show on BamaCentral and BamaCentral.com. We appreciate everybody who's watching us on YouTube, Facebook, or Twitter. You might be listening to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or on Amazon. We appreciate everyone who has subscribed, rated, and reviewed the show. We're going to have a fun show today. We're jumping on right now because Alabama softball is in rain delay. And we want to encourage you to follow Katie Wyndham. She's at Katie Wyndham _ She gave us a lot of her time yesterday talking about softball. So we want to encourage you to follow her at Katie Wyndham _ or just go to the Bama Central homepage and you can see her live updates for when Alabama softball is going to get rolling against UCLA in the Women's College World Series. But because they went into a little lightning delay, we're going to go ahead and jump on with our friend Blake Byler. Blake Byler covers Alabama basketball for us right here at BamaCentral.com. You already follow him at Blake Byler 45. And goodness gracious, it's been about 2 months or so since Alabama, we were out in Arizona having a lot of fun at the Final Four. Obviously, Alabama came up just a touch short, but just a magical season. And so it's been 2 months, and it's been a dramatic and exciting 2 months around Alabama basketball's offseason. We want to encourage you to follow Blake Byler. You probably already do. If you're not, you're living under a rock at Blake Byler 45 on the Twitter machine. Blake, thanks so much for your time. How's the last couple of months been for you?
Absolutely. It's been good. It's been I'm glad that the roster movement is kind of over now and that we have a clear picture of what the team is going to look like. Obviously, there were a lot of things up in the air for a while, from the first couple of weeks of everybody earning the transfer portal, all the open roster spots, to visits and getting everyone. And then, as we saw yesterday, the two guys announcing their returns from the NBA draft. So it's good to see you've got all 13 guys on paper now. You know what you're working with moving into the rest of the offseason, where they're going to get on campus, get into workouts and everything. But for me, as someone covering the team, it's nice that movement is done and that we don't have to be tracking who's the next transfer they're bringing on a visit or whatever. It's nice that we see what we have in front of us, and now we can kind of move forward a little bit.
Absolutely nice for you covering the team. But put yourself in Nate Oates, Ryan Pannone, Preston Murphy's shoes, knowing they get to wake up today and they don't have to dip into the transfer portal making calls. Now, obviously, they're going to stay busy, but they don't have to make that a part of their focus. Oh, my gosh, we got to fill 1 or 2 spots. How happy do you think those guys are having all that behind them?
Oh, I think they're overjoyed because they not only do they not have to go back into the portal, do they not have to go back out and try to recruit to fill holes. Unlike last year when Charles Bediako left unexpectedly, and then later into the offseason, Javon Quinterly left after he had already said he was coming back, which led to transfer portal and roster movements into June and July, which kind of hindered some of the teams gelling, I think, early on. Now you have a full team. You know the team you're going to have. And on top of that, the guys that you got back, instead of having to go out and recruit, you're bringing back possibly the best returning player in all of the SEC, if not college basketball, in Mark Sears, as well as a really good young player in Jarin Stevenson. And so both of them, you know exactly what their roles are going to be. They fit right back in. And now you have this roster built, and you don't have to go out and keep recruiting and keep trying to find new pieces, which is huge for game planning. It also lets Oates move on and look for that third assistant after Austin Klontz took the job at UTSA. So he can now turn his attentions towards that. They can work towards recruiting 2025 players, but they know that this roster is set, and that's huge for them as the summer rolls on and practice and workouts start.
Absolutely. So it's a great it's a good day. I don't want to go too far and say great day. It's a really, really good day for Alabama basketball. Let's start with the two guys that made their decisions yesterday, and we'll start with Mark Sears, obviously the headliner. Talk me through his draft decision. Obviously declared for the draft. This was the second year that he has done that. Went through the process. We tried to watch him at the combine. He kind of had a little knock. Just his whole draft process and maybe why he ended up opting to return to Tuscaloosa.
I think the reason that he was able to return was because of the fact that with NIL today, the fact that Alabama was able to give him some compensation for returning. Because you look at what he could have gotten, and really, Nate Oates said this at a Alabama event, that the only way that he would really leave is if he got a guaranteed contract. And when you look at the NBA draft, obviously all the first rounders are getting guaranteed contracts, and really only guys that are kind of drafted in the first half of the second round are given guarantees. And then the rest of them are given two ways, which means they're playing partially in the NBA, partially in the G League. So you look at that, and you look at the fact that getting drafted in the top 45 was already going to be pretty hard for Mark Sears. And then his combine was okay. He did deal with the injury, which limited his ability to kind of showcase what he was able to do. And on top of that, he measured not what the ideal measurements would be for an NBA point guard. With them measuring without shoes, he measured at 5'10", which is really small for an NBA point guard. And so whenever you factor all of those in, and you add in the fact that with NIL now, Alabama can compensate him equally, if not more, than what a two-way contract would be. He can come back. He can play another year at Alabama. He can become an all-time great at Alabama, help lead possibly the best team that he's ever had around him in what would be his 3 years. Coming off of a Final Four, you have a team that's going to be have super high expectations, going to be really fun to play for. I think all of those things factored into his decision. The biggest thing definitely being that he wasn't going to get a guaranteed contract. He didn't grade out that way. So why not just delay having to work with that two-way, having to work your way up? You can come back, you can make some money, and be one of the faces of college basketball for another year. I think that was the biggest thing with him. And kind of similarly with Jarin Stevenson, I believe he had some interest. He had some workouts with some teams with second-round picks that would be interested in picking him. But again, it comes down to a guarantee. And if you're going to be an 18-year-old freshman and you're going to leave when you could come back for a year, even come back for 2 years, because you think about how he reclassified. He was supposed to be a senior in high school last year. And so now Jarin Stevenson is really entering what would have been his freshman year with a year of college basketball under his belt. And then even if he stayed another year, like let's say he stayed until he was a junior, he's still only a 20-year-old junior. And to put that in perspective, Brandon Miller was 20 years old when he got drafted as a freshman. That just shows you how young Jarin Stevenson is and how much he can still do to improve. So I think his was definitely a matter of teams saw the potential with him. I mean, he's 6'11". He can shoot the ball. He's a versatile player. He's got the frame for of an NBA type forward. So the skill set and the size are there, but it's going to take some refining of those skills in college. And I think he's going to be able to do that, especially surrounded by such a good team and coaching staff that he's going to have at Alabama as a sophomore next season.
All right, so we've enjoyed watching or really reading our social medias over the last 2 months because Preston Murphy has been quite a character on the social medias, teasing the Alabama fan base about, obviously, Cliff Amore when that was recruitment was kind of coming to a head, a little bit on LeBaron Philon when that flip from Kansas or a letter of intent, kind of letting out of the letter of intent and getting to Alabama. He's been teasing a lot of the Alabama fans, and so I just ask you, we're 12 months into the Preston Murphy hire. I guess he was hired last June or so, right after he kind of came out of that show cause. So he's been with Alabama for about 12 months. Mm-hmm. And obviously, Brian Hodgson holds high esteem and now is at Arkansas State. And he was known as kind of the big dog lead recruiter for Nate Oates in the early part of his tenure. But to replace Brian Hodgson with a coach that's as effective as Preston Murphy, what has he meant to this program in these 12 months?
I think he's the most important person not named Nate Oates in the basketball program, just because of the way that he's been able to not only replace production-wise, but also enhance the recruiting footprint that Brian Hodgson laid down. And Hodgson was Oates' right-hand man at Buffalo. He came over. He became one of the best recruiters in the country. He was the lead catalyst for that 2022 class that had Brandon Miller, Noah Clowney, Jaden Bradley, Rylan Griffin, that super stacked class. But then when he leaves, you wonder kind of if the recruiting is going to fall off. But then Murphy comes in. Alabama signs a decent class in 2023, a class that doesn't have a ton of blue chip guys. I don't really think it had any like major 5-star players, but still he retained those guys. And then you look at this class, and this is the first kind of full recruiting cycle that Murphy has been here for. And Alabama locked down the number 2 overall recruiting class in the country, and Murphy was the lead recruiter for all of those guys. And Alabama had some established relationships with those guys before Murphy, but still he was able to come in, build those relationships, and close the deal with a 4-man class where the worst player in the class is still a top 50 prospect, which is absolutely ridiculous to think about, because you think a couple years ago, like 4 or 5 years ago, Alabama would be ecstatic to get a top 50 player at all, and that player would probably be instantly plugged into the lineup. But now you've got 4 freshmen coming in that are all ranked in the top 50, and a couple of them might not even play. So just to think about the level of talent that is now on this team because of Murphy is ridiculous. And then you also look at his work on the recruiting trail. Alabama got 4 transfers, and every single transfer that Alabama brought on a visit committed. And so when they come on their visits, I mean, we've seen pictures and everything that Preston Murphy is the main person that they're spending time with on the visit. Their main contact with the program. And just to show the work that he's done, you look at Houston Millett, Chris Youngblood, Aiden Holloway, Cliff Amori, the 4 transfers that Alabama got in this past class. Every single one of them took a visit to Alabama and then committed. And obviously Amori took the visit to North Carolina, but there were no players that took a visit to Alabama out of the transfer portal that didn't end up committing there. And I just think that shows the work that he's able to do and how good of a recruiter he is. And with him on the staff, he just got a raise and an extension going into the NCAA tournament when Oates' extension was announced. So his news probably flew under the radar a little bit, but with him on staff, there's nothing stopping Alabama from continuing to be a force on the recruiting trail, with him already establishing himself as one of the best recruiters in the country.
Man, it's been a lot of fun just to watch his work and see it all come together. We're talking to Blake Byler, the basketball expert for BamaCentral.com, and you're following him at Blake Byler45 on the Twitter machine. I want to encourage you to go to BamaCentral.com right now this morning. He's got you ready, previewing the Alabama 2024-25 basketball depth chart. So everything you need to know is right there in that article. The roster's loaded. 13 scholarship players that could probably play at any place in the country. And so everybody, on one hand, gets excited about, oh my gosh, might be the most talented roster in Tuscaloosa ever. The depth is incredible. But the flip side is, how do you keep them all happy, Blake? What about the minutes? Who's going to be sitting on the bench? How is it going to be distributed? And will personalities get rubbed the wrong way? What would you say to people who are worried about, does Alabama have too much talent?
I think it's a good problem to have, certainly, whenever you don't know who's going to play the most. I mean, you know a couple of guys that are going to play a lot of minutes. But as far as the depth goes, the competition for minutes is going to be fierce in practice. And I think, if anything, that's going to make the team better, because each and every day these guys can't get complacent, because there's a guy right behind them who is just as good as them, if not better, if you're talking about someone who's younger, fighting for your minutes. And so it's going to promote a lot of healthy, good competition. I mean, you even think back to what made Alabama football so good under Nick Saban. You got 5 stars starting, but then you got a 5-star right behind them. So you can't worry about the way that they're playing and the way that you get complacent or any of that, because you know that a guy behind you is going to be right there trying to take your job. And so when you look at trying to put this roster rotations together, I think a lot of these players knew what they were signing up for whenever they committed, because a lot of these guys, a lot of these additions, outside of really just 3 of the recruits that committed back in the fall, there's LeBaron Philon, one of the freshmen, and then all 4 transfers all signed up to come to this program and to join this team as it's being constructed. So it's not like they don't know that there's going to be a lot of talented players there. They're all aware of what's being built as they're joining. And that also goes for Jarin Stevenson coming back out of the draft. I mean, if he was worried about playing time and he was worried about showing himself, then he would probably stay in the draft, or he would even come out of the draft and enter the transfer portal to go start somewhere else. So you have all of these pieces, and it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough to figure out who can start. I don't think starters are that hard to figure out. A lot of them are going to be some of these fifth-year seniors that you've got, but even behind them, who plays, who gets minutes, how do you distribute those? We also know that Nate Oates does a lot of positionless lineups, so to speak. And so you have a lot of guys who can play different positions, a lot of guys who can play the 1 or the 2, the 2 or the 3. You have bigs that can play the 4 or the 5. You have guys that can shift on the wing between the 2, the 3, the 4. So really any of that, guys can earn minutes, and it's going to promote a lot of healthy competition that's going to lead to, I think, the team becoming even better. As far as attitudes go, I think that's a fair concern, as it is with any team, because, there's just one ball. There's only 5 guys that can play on the floor at one time. But again, they know what they were signing up for. And a lot of these guys, like if they wanted to go to a team where they could just play immediately and not worry about anyone behind them, they probably would have gone somewhere else, because you've seen the talent that Alabama has had under Nate Oates. They're coming to Alabama because they want to compete for championships, and that's what Alabama's been able to do in the last couple of years with Nate Oates and with a roster that's this talented.
Alabama basketball has been known since Nate Oates has been hired to be kind of on the cutting edge of basketball. And one of those aspects, obviously the shooting for the 3 points and layups and dunks, that is aside. But one aspect is the speed of play. We want to get up and down the floor and really run teams ragged. What will this depth allow Nate Oates to do? Will we see an even faster Alabama basketball team as far as pace goes this season because of the depth?
I think you could, and I think from an efficiency standpoint, it's going to be really hard to top the offense that you saw last season. Obviously, because it was one of the best. It was the best offense in school history. It broke all the records and was right there at the top in terms of efficiency the whole season. It may have finished at like 2 or 3. But the guys that left and the guys that you're replacing them with are equally good shooters, which is one of the biggest aspects of being an efficient offense, is being able to knock down your shots. You already look at this team, and you've got 4 40% three-point shooters just sitting there. And Mark Sears, Latrell Wrightsell from last year's team, and then you bring in Chris Youngblood, who shot 40% for 3 years in a row, and Houston Millette, who shot 40% at Pepperdine last year. So you've got a lot of shooters, and on top of that, you got guys who I think are better shooters than their percentages showed last year. Jarin Stevenson, I think, is a better shooter than his percentage showed. Aiden Holloway at Auburn, I think, is a better shooter than what his percentages showed. And they will have the chance to play in an offense with a lot of space, with a lot of pace getting up and down, and they'll have the chance to prove that. But also, like you said, with the depth, I think you could see a faster pace, because you're not going to have Mark Sears playing 36, 37, 38 minutes anymore. Mark Sears has guys behind him in Holloway and LeBaron Philon and Chris Youngblood, who can play a little bit of the 1. You can move Latrell Wrightsell to the 1, but you have guys who can spell Mark Sears. You have guys who could spell the 2 guard, who's not Aaron Estrada anymore, but you have guys who can come and spell them to where you're not playing your starting backcourt 35 minutes a game. You have guys who can continually stay fresh, and I think that's also going to improve Alabama's defense, because you have so many guys that can play where you're not limited by a lack of depth, and Nate Oates can truly be like, we're going to score no matter who is on the floor. This team is so talented that it doesn't matter who I play. So if you want to play, you're going to have to play defense. And I think that going into like what I said earlier about the competition is going to just raise the level that this Alabama team plays at. And they're going to be able to play faster. They're going to be fresher at the end of games because of how deep they are. And they're going to have better defensive lineups on the floor because of what Nate Oates can do there.
All right, so we're kind of dancing around the last kind of assistant coach question. With all these players, Ryan Pannone, I think, has kind of flown under the radar as far as how important is he to the coaching staff. He is hugely important. He is the master. I mean, Nate Oates is, but he is really tinkering and developing layers to the Alabama offense and defense, in my opinion. So I wonder, or ask you, the expert, how much fun is Ryan Pannone going to be able to have with, oh, we're playing a team with one big, and so we're going to play with this lineup, or we're playing, whoever Alabama is playing this season, Ryan Pannone's going to have a toolbox full of tools to manipulate the game in the way that Alabama wants to. What do you think that he's really experiencing right now, and how will his skill sets, as far as a game planner and basketball mind, be able to be put on display this season?
I think he's probably most excited to see the lineup versatility that Alabama is going to have, because you have so many pieces that are all really good at a lot of different things. And so, like, for example, if you want a very defensive heavy lineup, you're going to obviously have Cliff Amore, one of the best shot blockers in the country, at the 5. But then if you want to reorient that to a really fast-paced up and down offensive style, you can play Aiden Sherrill, 5-star freshman coming in at center, who's 6'11" and can shoot the 3. You can play him. You can play Jarin Stevenson at the 4, and then you can go with guys that are really fast, like Aiden Holloway. You can play Aiden Holloway and Mark Sears on the floor at the same time. You can throw Chris Youngblood in there, who's a really good shooter. You can put Houston Millett on the floor, who's a shooter. You could have a lineup with 4 40% three-point shooters plus Sherrill at the 5. And I could go on and on about the different lineup combinations that you could have. I didn't even mention Grant Nelson, who I think is going to be even better in year 2, having played in this system already, being adjusted. We saw how good he was in the NCAA tournament. I think the different ways that Alabama can create lineups and that Pannone can scheme lineups around, especially dependent on who they're playing, it's hard to find a weakness that they can't fix by making a substitution, because there's so many talented guys that are good at so many different things, and that they aren't all just three-point shooters, or they aren't all just defensive specialists, or all just rebounders. There's different guys at different positions that are good at different things. And so that's going to make great for matchups, great for schemes, whether that be offensively or defensively, that it's going to be hard to find weaknesses with the way that they can substitute. And the amount of guys, all 13 of them, I think, that could be worthy of playing time. And obviously that's not going to happen because you can't play 13 guys in a game. But you have the capability to utilize any of these pieces on the roster based on the matchup that you're presented with.
We're hanging out with Blake Byler right here on the Joe Gaither Show, BamaCentral's basketball expert. Make sure you're following him at Blake Byler 45. Roughly a month and a half, 2 months ago, these kind of the pieces were starting to fall in place. You were starting to see what this roster could be, and now it's solidified. All 13 roster spots are finalized, and you're seeing an online narrative. Basically, it's national champ. I mean, Nate Oates has put the expectation. It's a national championship worthy roster, and I think that's absolutely true. But you're also seeing, if Alabama doesn't get to the Final Four, if Alabama doesn't win a national championship, it's a failure, blah, 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 XYZ, ABC, poo-poo on Nate Oates. You put out about a month and a half ago, there's no such thing as Final Four or bust. I think that's a very well-measured perspective, because it's challenging. It is, it's hard to win in college basketball. Going November all the way to May, many, many things can happen. So let me put the fan hat on and let you respond. Oh, man, Blake, it's Final Four bust. You got to get to San Antonio. You got to win the whole dang thing, or it's a failure. How would you parse that and respond to that?
I think you have to kind of separate your Alabama football brain from your Alabama basketball brain, because the two sports are fundamentally different. And when you look at, especially – Alabama fans are coming off the tail end of Nick Saban's dynasty at Alabama, where if you had the best team, there's no excuse not to win it in football. And that's just how football is. It's a physical game. You can very easily overpower your opponent and show that you are the best team. Basketball's different. And basketball, you can have off nights. Your opponent can have really good nights, especially in a format such as the 68-team NCAA tournament, where you have to win 6 games in a row. That's 6 games in a row that you can't have a bad game while your opponent also has a really good game. regardless of the talent disparity between the two teams. I think it's fair to have high expectations. I think this is probably the most talented team Nate Oates has ever had. I think this is very well possibly the most talented team Alabama has ever put on the floor in the history of its basketball program. But I still think as far as a Final Four goes, that's one of the hardest things to achieve in college athletics. And I think just in athletics in general is to make it to the Final Four, to win 4 straight games in 2 weeks against teams that you probably are scouting at the last minute. And when you're at the end of the season dealing with injuries, everything like that, the Final Four is really, really hard to get to. And so I don't think it's fair for any team, whether it's the preseason number 1 team or an up-and-coming team or a number 1 overall seed. I don't think Final Four or the season is a failure is ever a fair measure to put when it comes to college basketball. I do think that regular season expectations can be fair because you have a much larger sample size and it's kind of less of a crapshoot tournament like the NCAA tournament is. And yes, NCAA tournament success is important, but I think to show how good a team is, they're going to show it over the course of the regular season. So if you want to have the expectation that, Alabama is SEC regular season title good, and they need to be like top 4 in the SEC, they need to be top 2, they need to win it, or it's a disappointment. I can understand that perspective a little more than saying Final Four bust, because you don't know what's going to happen in the month of March. It's too unpredictable. We've seen that time and time again. There are upsets every single year. 1 seeds lose early every single year. And I don't think it's fair to call those teams failures, especially when you're talking about losses in the Sweet 16 Elite 8. Like if let's say this Alabama team got to the Elite 8 and lost at the buzzer to the 2 seed in their region, I don't think you would deem that season as a failure, even though you fell short of your Final Four goal, because you're losing to a team that is almost as good as you, a 2 seed compared to a hypothetical 1 seed, and you're losing to another top 5-8 team in the country. So I think it's hard to judge based on what round you get to in the NCAA tournament. But as far as regular season success, I think it's fair to have expectations there.
Well, you can follow all of the regular season right there on BamaCentral.com and with Blake Byler at Blake Byler 45 on BamaCentral.com right now. You've got previewing the 2024-25 Alabama basketball depth chart, and I'm just going to read it right off as far as the starters, the starting 5 that Blake identified. And Blake, you can make sure you can comment on them right after. We got Mark Sears as your point guard, number 1. Latrell Wrightsell, number 2. You got Jarin Reed as the 3. Grant Nelson as the 4, with Cliff Amori as the 5. First off, what I see is fifth year senior, experience, lots of experience. It makes me think back to Alabama losing to San Diego State up in Louisville, all those old men beating the young guys for Alabama. What do you make of just the starting 5 and how quality? Obviously, it might be some adjustments based on matchups, but if that's the starting 5, you roll the ball out against anyone with that group.
Yeah, you can. And I think a lot of people probably have Chris Youngblood in their starting 5 to make it the lineup of 5 fifth-year seniors. I went with, in my depth chart preview, I went with Jarin Reed, the 5-star freshman, at the 5, strictly because of the defensive potential that he brings. He's 6'7". He's super athletic. He's a versatile player, and he's one of the best defenders, in the high school class. And some scouts have talked about him. Just saw him play at Team USA tryouts where he made the under-18 team, and said one of his greatest kind of traits, aspects, was that he guards everybody. And I think that's something that's invaluable when it comes to this team. And that puts Chris Youngblood, who I think will play starting caliber minutes, as the 6th man, and you have former conference player of the year kind of leading your second unit. And so as far as your most experienced 5, you can definitely go Sears, Wrightsell, Youngblood, Nelson, and Cliff. But those 2 possible lineups are really great because it's a ton of experience. You've got 5 either 4 or 5 fifth-year seniors who have played a whole lot of basketball and are all 22, 23, maybe even 24 years old. So they're grown men essentially. And so the amount of basketball that they've played and that's just going to make them an even harder team to beat. And I like how you brought up the San Diego State team from the 2023 season that kind of beat up on a young Alabama team and made it even harder on them. You're going to have fewer mistakes from a veteran team. You're going to have more well-run sets. You're going to have better communicated defense. You're going to have better leadership. All of it is going to be better because you have all of these leaders. And then on top of that, you have a senior in Houston Millett that can come off the bench. You have, if you start Darion Reed, you have a senior in Chris Youngblood that can come off the bench. And these lineups also, you get to move Grant Nelson to the 4, which is more of his natural position. That's where he thrived in the NCAA tournament when he was able to play next to Nick Pringle at the 5. At the 5, you've got Cliff Amore, who is one of the best shot blockers in the country. He was Big Ten all-defensive team the past 2 years, and he's kind of exactly what Alabama was missing on the interior a year ago. He's that Charles Bediako type player. I think he's Charles Bediako with a little more athleticism when it comes to rim running and being able to finish dunks and everything like that. And then you look at the backcourt, and you've got Mark Sears, who possibly preseason SEC Player of the Year, probably preseason first-team All-American. And then next to him, Latrell Wrightsell, who had the best three-point percentage, or I think the second best three-point percentage in the SEC behind Reed Shepherd, who's going to be a lottery pick. So you've got so many guys who can start, can play starter minutes. You even look at the bench, and like I said, Chris Youngblood, Houston Millett. You could even see, I think Aiden Sherrill has the potential to be a starter caliber player. I think Jarin Stevenson, had Grant Nelson left, which obviously he decided to stay, I would have been completely comfortable if you had Jarin Stevenson as the starting power forward. But now you've got him as the backup. And so you've got all of these players who are starting caliber players that aren't even in the starting lineup. And it just goes to show, like we've been talking about, the depth of this team.
All right, you want to play a game, Blake?
Let's play it.
All right, those starting 5, remove them. Send them off to Mars. Doesn't matter. Mark Sears, Latrell Wrightsell, you had Darion Reed, Grant Nelson, and Cliff Amore. Okay, they're in Mars. They're not playing basketball for Alabama. I think it's pretty well consensus that as a group of 13, Alabama is favored as the 1 or the 2 team in the SEC, depending on your glasses and perspective. Without those 5, where does the other 8 stack up in the SEC? Now, obviously, you got depth issues if you're only playing with 8. But if you've got just the other 8, LeBaron Philon, Aiden Holloway, Aiden Sherrill, you got Jarin Stevenson, the rest of the Chris Youngblood as well, and Modi Abate. Oh, who's the 2 that are off my head? Oh, Houston Millett,
not Cunningham, Houston Millett. There you go.
All right, so those 8 guys are your hypothetical roster. Where are they finishing in the SEC by themselves?
I mean, it's still a middle of the pack, if not better, unit. Whenever you look at, if you just take the backup 5 or whatever that 8 starting 5 would be, you're going to have Aiden Holloway at point guard, who was the starting point guard for a 4 seed and the SEC tournament champs last year, who I think is going to improve with a year in a new system, also a former McDonald's All-American. You'll have Chris Youngblood at the 2, who was a conference player of the year last year, 5th-year senior. You'll have Houston Millett at the 3, who would be a 40% three-point shooter, 14-point-a-game guy at Pepperdine, transferring up a level. You got to see how they adjust. But then again, still a good player. At the 4, Jarin Stevenson could have gone to the NBA draft, instead came back, would have been comfortable starting him at the 4. And now he's in what would have been his freshman season had he not reclassified. And then at the 5-star McDonald's All-American, Aiden Sherrill. And that's your backup 5. And it's just like listing all of those accolades and things like that out loud as you're talking about your backup 5. Holloway and Sherrill are McDonald's All-Americans, and Stevenson, had he not reclassified, probably would have been one. So you've got 3 blue chip recruits and 2 really good transfers as your backup 5. And then I didn't even mention the last three guys, Mo Diabate, who without him, Alabama loses in the second round to Grand Canyon. And then you've got Nas Cunningham and LeBaron Philon, who are both top 50 recruits and who might not see the floor that much. So, like, it's ridiculous the number of good players and talented players that Alabama has. And that backup five, I don't know where it ranks. I'm not super familiar with all of the rosters in the SEC at this point.
Lots of movement
And everything. I think Alabama, Auburn, Tennessee are probably the top of the conference right now. Florida also up there. But then as far as going down the list, I think that backup five probably stacks up with a lot of the starting fives of the middle of the pack of the SEC. And as long as this team gels and they're comfortable with their minutes being played and it's a selfless team, I mean, there's no reason this team can't win a whole lot of games because of the amount of talent that you have.
All right, so we got some friends over at Yay, Alabama. We got to put an idea in their head. They need to sell practice tickets straight to NIL fun. You get, I mean, not every day, but a handful of practice open available, because that 5-on-5 and even the next three coming off, you're just watching practice. I mean, you can put them up in a soundproof box if you don't want to hear NATO coaching. I think you can make a lot of money, Yay, Alabama, watching the 5-on-5, selling some practice tickets.
Listen, I think that'd be great entertainment just to see the competition. And just to see the way that they'll mix up teams too, because it won't always be starters versus backups, the different lineup combinations you see. And this also feels like it's probably going to be one of the most anticipated, if not the most anticipated, Alabama basketball season we've ever seen. Coming off a Final Four and then having the amount of players return with the different additions that they've made. You've never had this high of an expectation before if you're Alabama basketball, and you've also never come off a Final Four before. So there's obviously, I'm sure season tickets are going to be in really high demand. I think people would love to watch practice. I wouldn't be shocked if they tried to have some kind of event. They need to have some kind of charity exhibition open to the public instead of all these closed scrimmages that they love doing, because people are going to want to see every bit of this team that they can before the season starts in November.
Yeah, 2 years ago, they had the little open scrimmage before the guys went to Europe, and that was a pretty decent little crowd. You want to put one of those on this summer, I think you'll have another pretty good crowd. Pick an Alabama bye week for basketball, for football. What's that week number?
You've got the one in week 4 before the Georgia game. Yeah.
Perfect. Right there. Yeah. Sell out Coleman Coliseum and watch the guys play 5-on-5 for 2 hours or so. Let's get another narrative, get your response. I'm going to put my Auburn fan hat on, right? Okay, so now I'm an Auburn fan, and yesterday Mark Sears announces his return, and I'm going to say, oh, Aiden Holloway, you are going to find out what being sold a dream really means. Aiden Holloway with the little kind of dig at Auburn and his transfer, I was sold a dream. Well, now Mark Sears is back. They bring in LeBaron Philon. You're going to find out what it really means to be sold a dream.
Listen, I don't think Aiden Holloway committed to Alabama thinking that he was going to be a starter and play 30 minutes a game. I just don't. I think that he knew and that the staff was up front with him about the reality of Mark Sears choosing or possibly choosing to return. I think that he probably knew about Alabama's possibility of getting LeBaron Philon. And even with all of those guys there, I still think he could play decent minutes. I think it depends. I think that's all dependent on his play because the competition between him and Philon is going to be a real one for the backup point guard spot, so to speak. But we know Nate Oates can play multiple point guards on the floor at the same time. I mean, he practically did all of last season with Aaron Estrada. I think Aaron Estrada is somewhat more of a point guard than Mark Sears is, and they shared the floor the entire season. We saw it a couple of years ago when Oates would play Javon Quinterly and J.D. Davison at the same time. He's not scared to play point guards at the same time. And so I think there will be spots for Holloway, and I think it's all about how he gels and how he improves and how he embraces his role coming over from Auburn after having kind of a difficult freshman season. I mean, he didn't shoot the ball well from three. He didn't shoot the ball well from the floor. We saw a lot of flashes of what he potentially could be, and we saw why he was a 5-star recruit and why he was a McDonald's All-American and all of that. But I think it's going to be good for him, honestly, to get to come into a system that is not going to have to rely on him to take off-balance sidestep threes off the dribble. Because one thing I noticed watching him was he had poor shot selection, and a lot of his field goal percentage, three-point percentage woes were probably due to a lot of bad shots being taken. You're not going to have that here, and he's not going to have to be pulling off the dribble to get a shot off at Alabama, because there's going to be a lot of shrink threes, a lot of driving kicks that he's going to be open for catch and shoot looks, which I think is really going to help his three-point percentage. And then if he can take care of the ball, he's also going to be learning from possibly the best point guard in America. So he's going to have Mark Sears able to mentor him and turn him into a better player. And if he sticks around at Alabama, he could be a really good player by his junior year, ready to take over as Mark Sears leaves. And if he's committed to that, he can be a really, really good player. And I don't think back to your original point, I don't think he came into the program thinking he was going to be some 30-minute a game starter. Like, I don't think that was the vision that he had whenever he decided that Alabama, of all places, was where he wanted to go to. I think if he wanted that role, he would have gone to a different program.
All right, we got two more with Blake Byler. We're going to get him out of here because Katie Wyndham just reported that Alabama softball is going to be tentatively starting at 12:36, so almost 12:40 for first pitch for the Women's College World Series, and we want to get everybody in front of a TV who wants to see that. Blake, I want you to answer your friend Jacob Pickle's question. Jacob Pickle, the former president of Crimson Chaos, did a great job with Crimson Chaos last season. He proposes this to the audience. The double SEC title season, the Herb Jones season, goes out in the Sweet 16, 2020-2021 team, the Herb Jones, Alex Reese team, versus this past year's team in a best-of-7 series. Who we got?
I like that question. That's a good question. I'll go the Herb Jones team in 6 games.
Whew. Defensively, probably being the reason why, or
it's the defense. I think I think that was a better team overall. When you've got who'd they have? They had JQ off the bench. They started Shackelford, Petty, Herb Jones. Do I have a healthy Jordan Bruner on this team?
Right, and Primo's right in that group.
Primo. Jordan Bruner, you had Alex Reese off the bench, you had Keon Ellis off the bench. Underrated team. People don't talk about that team enough because it was the COVID season, a little shortened, no crowds and everything. But I'd go that team in probably 6 games. I think the offense from the 2024 team is good enough to win them a couple games. But that'd be a fun series. I like that question. Those are obviously two great teams in Alabama basketball history. But Herb Jones would be the best player on the floor, and I think the defense would be really, really tough to score on, even though it'd be kind of really good offense against really good defense. But I think the better defense would win out over the course of the games, knowing that the 2021 team also had a good offense to go with it.
If you're enjoying Blake and his basketball discussion, make sure you subscribe to Blue Collar Unplugged. I'm sure those guys will have a new episode in the future as they can get together to talk about all these topics at length. But my last question for you, Blake, is about the schedule. Nate Oates is once again putting together a murderer's row of just non-conference hit after hit after hit. I'm reading your tweet from May 24th. I think this is all-inclusive. Versus Creighton at home, Illinois and Birmingham, at Purdue, McNeese with Will Wade coming in, Kent State, obviously going out to Las Vegas to play 3 really good opponents, an SEC, ACC challenge that might draw you North Carolina or Duke or someone else of high quality. What is the one game or the 2 games that you're like, oh my gosh, no matter what, I'm going to be there because it's going to be that high level of basketball and it's going to be a lot of fun to take in?
Creighton for sure, because I think that's going to be the big non-conference home game where you're going to see a sold-out Coleman Coliseum in the middle of December. Which is going to be really cool to see. And Creighton's going to be a really good team. And you also have the way that game ended last year with the comeback and then the lead and then the comeback and then Mark Sears like in and out a half-court shot at the end of that game. Definitely
Trevor Ellifert's foul.
Right. And then you go back to 2012, Trevor Ellifert's foul, a lot of history between these two teams. I think that'll be a really fun game between two high-level teams. One I'm really looking at is the November, I think it's 15th game against Purdue. The road game against Purdue early in the season. That's the second week of the season. And whenever I saw that game announced, I expected it to be kind of a mid-December like it was last season whenever Alabama played the 3 straight Purdue, Creighton, Arizona games, and like they've done in the past when it was Gonzaga and Houston and Memphis and teams like that. I expected that to be kind of a later December game. But Matt Painter and Nate Oates said, no, second week of the season, we want to do this. And so Alabama will play, I think, 3 bye games before then. They'll play 2 the first weekend of the season, then they'll play 1 on Monday. And then on that Friday, they'll travel up to West Lafayette and play Purdue and Mackey Arena. And that's 2 Final Four teams from a year ago playing in the second week of the season is going to be really fun. And I also think without Zach Edey, Alabama is probably the better team in that matchup, but obviously playing on the road is tough. So it's a big opportunity to go on the road, and you've got all this hype around you. Now go prove it against the top 15, maybe even a top 10 team early in the season. So that's one I've got circled. Also, that's the weekend of the, I think, Mercer football game. So, like, that's the bigger game between football and basketball that weekend because football's got, like, a bye game that week. So it's going to have a lot of attention around it, and it's going to be a really fun one to watch, especially with a lot of other teams playing bye games early in the season. You're going to get to see some high-level competition between 2 Final Four teams from a year ago.
It's going to be a lot of fun. I'm counting down the days till November. You guys can have your summer if you want, but November is coming soon, and I cannot wait for it. We're going to follow Blake Byler, all of his coverage. You're going to find out more in the near future about an Alabama third assistant coach. We'll get the schedule finalized, not set in stone, but it's going to be a great, great November, at least on the excitement side. We don't know about results, but excitement will be at an all-time high. Make sure you follow Blake at Blake Byler 45. Subscribe to his podcast, The Blue Collar Unplugged Show, with Jacob Pickle and Matthew Gibson right here on Bama Central as well. Blake, thanks so much for your time, man. It's going to be a great summer, and we'll talk to you again very soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. That's Blake Byler, and we're going to actually continue the show by talking to Austin Bidwell. We will expand on the Walsh Writing Network, and we're going to turn it over right now to a conversation I had earlier this morning with Austin Bidwell of Inside the Royals. All right, and we're going to keep it rolling right here on the Joe Gaither Show, right here on BamaCentral, BamaCentral.com. But we're going to shift gears on the Walsh Writing Network and change over to Inside the Royals with our friend Austin Bidwell. We talked with him last week, and the Royals have really had a strong week, going 6-3. So he's had a nice little time covering a winning squad. We appreciate all his time joining us. You can follow him on the Twitter machine at Austin from KC, and make sure you're checking out Inside the Royals daily, as they are the 3rd, 4th best team in the American League as we're sitting here about to go into the month of June. Austin, thanks for your time, man. Hope you've had a good 7 or 8 days.
Yeah, no, it's always great to be here. Great to talk about some Royals ball. And, the last few weeks have been good, so hopefully we can keep it going.
Absolutely. So the last time we talked, you guys were getting ready. The Royals were getting ready to host the Detroit Tigers. They went on, swept the Tigers, went down to Tampa Bay in that terrible facility. Got a 3-game series winning two out of the 3, and now they've played on the road in Minnesota. And it's been a little bit of a downturn, but has a chance to split the series today. The Royals are kicking off. By the time you see this, they will already be going. So you need to be watching Inside the Royals for all of Austin's updates. Tell us about the last week or so. About you reeled off 5 wins in a row before dropping 3. Tell us what's your takeaway over the last 7 or 8 days.
Yeah, kind of in that homestand last time we talked about it, we talked about the Tigers series, and I said 2 wins or a sweep is the only thing that's going to be satisfactory for the Royals. And I mean, they went out there, they got themselves a sweep, so that's always going to be, positive. And then they moved into that Rays series, a series where, that would answer a lot of questions. The Rays, aren't as dominant as they were the past few years, but that's still a very formidable team on the road. Could they face these road teams? Could they beat road teams? And they went in there and they got a 3-series win. Granted, they went out that next series, didn't have a great few outings against the Twins, but the Twins, regardless of the record, are an AL Central opponent that has been very good in the last few years, gives good teams trouble. They have great players. And Royal starters have had some rough games going into this series or in this series. So, it's not great to lose 3 games in a row ever, but after you reel off 6, 7 wins in a row, you can't really complain about, taking and giving some games with some tough teams on the road.
Yeah, it's not football where every single game is win or lose. I mean, yes, you want to win every single game, but baseball is kind of that. Okay, you got to take it on the whole when you're looking at a season. When we talked last Monday, you highlighted 3 Royals to watch, and 2 of them have been absolutely dominant, on fire over the last week. Let's start with Bobby Witt Jr. Bobby Witt Jr. Wins his first AL Player of the Week award in his career. Tell us about his hot week. How did he beat out everybody else in the American League?
Yeah, so Bobby Witt is just a specimen. I mean, you see him on TV, but unless you're there in person, I don't think anyone really realizes how fast he is or how hard he hits the ball, because he has just been fantastic this season. Against the A's, he had a game where he had a double and a triple in his first 2 at-bats. He had a 2 home run game, crushed each of them over 400-something feet, I believe. And defensively, he's been even great. He has one of the best WARs in the entire league, win above replacement. He's just been fantastic in all facets of the game for the Royals. Steals bases when you need him to. There's really nothing that he hasn't done for Kansas City in terms of being one of the best young players in the league and being able to play not only great at the plate, but great at his position, and putting some defense behind some of the pitchers that rely on him, like Lugo or Reagans or Waka, to get some quality outs and to save some big hits and big plays, which he's been doing, and he did especially last week to mix in with his multiple home run games, and just his ability to hit as a whole throughout the past few weeks has just been incredible.
And the other big Royal that you pointed out was Seth Lugo. Seth Lugo has now dropped his ERA to the best mark in the American League. Give us an update on maybe the leader in the Cy Young clubhouse for this year.
Yeah, no. Seth Lugo, he pitched yesterday, actually. Pitched a great game, 1 run allowed through 6 innings. Started off slow with the run allowed in the 2nd inning, but it's kind of like that with some of these Royals pitchers where they start slow, get back into it. But he's been exceptionally great. He has one of the best pitch mixes in the entire MLB. I believe he gets up to 8 total pitches thrown. He throws pitches that nobody else in the league can even throw.
Can you describe the slurve, what it looks like, what the batter sees? Obviously, we're kind of familiar with the curveball. You go 12, from 12 to 6 or whatever. What does a slurve do?
Yeah, so it obviously still has, a little 12 to 6 drop on it, but it's going to be a lot more horizontal breaking, especially over this year. Lugo wasn't one of the, not many pitchers throw the slurve. I believe 5 pitchers in the entire MLB throw the pitch, and Lugo went into the offseason, added 6 inches to his vertical drop on that pitch. So when a batter's standing in the batter's box, there's not much you can do against a pitch like that when it's put correctly. It's breaking down and out or in, depending on which side of the plate you're on, and it's impossible to see. And that's just one of his 8 pitches that he throws, because you never know if it's going to be, a 93, 94 mile an hour fastball in the corner, if the ball's going to break 8 inches away from the plate at the last second. So I think that's why he's had so much success, is his great, ability to mix up his pitches, his great pitch arsenal, as well as his ability, this year specifically, to place those pitches and to get early outs and sometimes easy outs.
All right, so tell me, what's a batter? You said, the batter is kind of helpless. What are they supposed to do? What's the strategy? You got a pitcher who's like, okay, I got 8 pitches. Are you guessing? Are you up there? Okay, he threw me a fastball and a changeup and a slurve last time, so I'm probably going to see one of the other 5. What's the best strategy for these Major League Baseball pitchers against hitters against a pitcher that's so dominant and has so many tools and tricks like Seth Lugo?
Yeah, in the previous years for Seth Lugo, we could have told you to sit on his fastball, to watch for his fastball. He was throwing that around 35% of the time or more. This year, he's dropped that down to around 22%. So it's not like you can go up there and wait for him to throw a specific pitch, because he's, this year completely came in and changed really how he's doing his process as a whole and what he's throwing, what he's, when he's throwing, the velo, the spin rate on the ball. So as a batter, I mean, you can try to guess what he's throwing, But I think that what a lot of batters have found success is just, poking the ball through holes at a point where you kind of just protect the plate and find a gap. And that's really the only place this season he's been super, touchable is when he is getting hits barely poked to the offense, because he's not allowing, power hitters to get up there and take him yard. I believe the run he let up yesterday was from a sac fly. So it's not like batters are getting up there and taking them 400 feet for runs. You just, you got to take your battles and take your small base hits when you can get them against Seth Lugo, considering he doesn't give up many.
All right, so I'm still a baseball amateur. We're talking to Austin Bidwell of Inside the Royals. He's our baseball expert right here on the Joe Gaither Show. I'm looking at the Royals' schedule. I'm looking at their standings, and obviously having a real good season. But you're 21-8. The Royals are 21-8 at home, but only 14-14 on the road. So right at 500. What's it going to take, or what do you think is the difference between playing at home and on the road? Because I'm looking at the Yankees. I'm looking at the couple of teams that are above the Royals, the Yankees, Orioles, and Guardians. They all have winning records on the road. Yankees are 20-11. Orioles are 16-8. Guardians are 19-13. So not as good, but still a positive record on the road to go hand in hand with the positive home record as well.
Yeah, so, when you look at all three of those teams specifically, you see with the Yankees and the Orioles, just their batters are consistently hitting. They're consistently getting on base. They're hitting home runs, home or away. And the Guardians, they have a great bullpen. They're just finding times to get on. The Royals, what they struggle with through times, especially in away games, is they're not very consistent in their scoring. They like to pour on runs in one inning. They'll put 6 on you in a blink of an eye, but for the next 8 innings, you might not get anything. That's really what happened in a Rays game where they put on 4 runs in the 9th inning and still lost because their offense had been stagnant the entire day. So if they really want to get better on the road and, long-term down the season, you can't expect all of your runs to flash in one inning like, they're the 2015 Royals. You kind of have to put runs out throughout the game to give yourself a chance later in the contest. Another thing that they've kind of been struggling with on the road is some of the pitchers don't have the greatest starts on the road that they do at home. You see that a lot, maybe not with Seth Lugo because he's been phenomenal this year, but when you look at guys like Cole Reagans, you look at guys like Alec Marsh, their numbers comparatively on the road and at home are different in a way that, is obviously negative. So the pitchers just really have to, even when there's not that home field advantage and that home audience behind them, just go out there and pitch, the games that they have been doing at home if the Royals want to pick up and go above 500 on the road.
All right, so let's talk about the Guardians specifically because they are right above the Kansas City Royals, 2.5 games above them in the standings. So it's not by no means unreachable. But what's it going to take for the Royals to say, okay, we got to find this consistency by scoring more than one inning in the road, by scoring, by having more than these flashes on the road, and get our starting pitching off to better starts? Because you want to close that gap. You hit it the last time with us that the AL Central is a strong division, but the Royals are having a great year. So how can the Royals close the gap on the Cleveland Guardians?
Yeah, so I think there's absolutely 2 parts to this. Of course, they have to continue to be consistent. They have to continue to play their ball. And, all the things I talked about on the road, because at home they're doing all these things. I think that they have to continue to play well, even if it's not against teams like the A's or the Tigers. And when they go into tough series upcoming like the Dodgers, the Yankees, the Guardians, home and away. So you really have to continue to play on a consistent basis against no matter the level of competition you're playing, regardless of that it's a bottom feeder team or a top team. You have to win, series still. And another part of that that's really big is the Guardians just have to quit being so darn good, because the Royals, the Royals went and they won 7-8 games in a row, and they didn't gain a single game in the division race because the Guardians also went and won 7-8 games in a row. The Royals have been lucky in their past few days to not really take too much of a hit because the Guardians just dropped a series to the Rockies, which you can't expect things like that to happen. You can't expect the bottom feeder team to beat a team like the Guardians in the series consistently. So the Royals just really have to play their own ball and hope for a little luck that the Guardians can get back on, to earth a little bit and stop being so hot. But to be 2.5 games back this far into the season with the Guardians playing how they are, I don't think anyone in Kansas City is going to be too frustrated with that.
All right, so you're going to be following Austin Bidwell for the last game of the Minnesota Twins series. Royals and Twins getting started about noon Central Time. So when you see this, he'll be knee deep, probably in the third or fourth inning. You want to follow all of his coverage on Inside the Royals. Let's talk about June, because here we are, May 30th, one more day in the month. June looks like a monster month for the Kansas City Royals. And when you talk about it, you think, oh, it's not even the All-Star break yet, first or second week of July. But if you look at June, I counted 7 games against those Guardians. You just did it. You got 4 against the Yankees and 3 against the Dodgers in a span of, 7 days. So that's going to be a really challenging week. What do you think is going to be the focus or the emphasis on June on basically, look, the amateur over here says keep your head above water. What do you think is the key for June?
Yeah, I think this is going to be a really good month for the Royals to figure out what type of team they really are. Are they the team that's sneaky good? Or are they the team that's good? Are they teams that are going to go out there and win series against the Yankees, against the Dodgers, against the Guardians? Or are they the team that's going to sneak into a wild card and attempt to make a run? So I think that going into these, you have to, there's 4 series out of here. You have the 2 home and away against the Guardians and the Yankees, Dodgers. And I think that if the Royals come out of there with 2 series wins, that you can be content with the fact that they are a team that is contending with the best teams in the MLB. Obviously, that's easier said than done. But even if you come out of there with, 1 series win, against teams of that caliber, you're talking about 3 of the best teams in the league right now, to go into, July playing easier competition than what you're going to be playing in June, and you stay on a pace with the Guardians and you can beat the Yankees or Dodgers. I think that that's absolutely, something to be proud of for the Royals as a whole. And I think another thing that they need to focus on is when we get into that series of July, what is your health looking like? What is your bullpen looking like? How many arms did you have to use so often because your pitchers got in trouble? So a big thing is just going to be to play the ball they've been playing, continue to allow their pitchers to go deep, try to preserve health on, the roster as a whole, and to come out kind of afloat. But, hopefully for the Royals, they can come out maybe better off than they went in.
Now, it's not all challenging. I see the Miami Marlins on the schedule, so that should be maybe 3 cakewalk days going into that big 4-game series against the Guardians. It's going to be a fun month of June, and we'll be paying attention to the Kansas City Royals with our friend Austin Bidwell from Inside the Royals. Why don't we take one step back, and talk about some big picture topics with baseball. Angel Hernandez captured all the national headlines, and really even the non-baseball fans know Angel Hernandez, the umpire, is retiring or is forced to retire. Either way, whatever you want to define it, he's not going to be umpiring Major League Baseball. What was your reaction to the end of the Angel Hernandez era?
As a little league flag football ref myself, I try not to go too hard on some officials, but thank goodness that man is gone, because he definitely made some calls. It's always funny to see retirement compilations of his missed calls, especially when you see multiple and they're all different. So, try not to go too hard on referee/umps, but.
Where do you stand on the robo-ump that everybody keeps floating over the last handful of years? Oh, we need to get robo-strike zones.
I think that, I think it takes away a little bit. I'm not as opposed to long reviews and a lot of reviews that everyone else is, especially with the pitch clock and the timing down. But I think that you still need to have a human element to the game. If you want to add a challenge system for big calls, fine, so be it. That's a little different. But to make, strike zones are human, human made, human errors. You have a buffer zone in your strike zone. So I don't like the robo ump situation, but I'm not going to stop watching baseball if they put it in. So
I kind of align with you on the let's not criticize umpires and referees and officials that much, because look, it is a hard job. And when you get to that level, the speed of the games, even a game that might be perceived as slow as baseball, it's a fast game with professionals. My issue, Austin, is you can't let these guys consistently make mistakes. You got to, hold them to some sort of accountability. And I feel like Angel Hernandez was basically let off the leash for a long, long time to make whatever mistakes he wanted to. And it's just baseball. It's just human error.
Yeah, the umpire union definitely did him a few favors throughout the years. We'll just say that.
All right. The other major story that caught my eye, was a bad one, a sad one. Ronald Acuna Jr. tears his ACL. Now, some of the Braves fans that I have heard and talked to, the last time he tore his ACL, the Braves won a World Series. The Braves may not be able to sustain Ronald Acuna Jr.'s injury. At this point, they're, 6 games behind the Philadelphia Phillies. Just such a talent off the field. What do you think? What was your takeaway for Ronald Acuna Jr. Tearing the other ACL?
Yeah, I mean, it's always sad, regardless of, what team you root for, who your competitors are, who your rivals are. You never want to see young talent get hurt. And there's such a pool of young talent. When you talk about Ronald Acuna, Julio Rodriguez, Bobby Witt Jr., just all these guys that are just insanely not only fun to watch, but good for the sport as a whole, and bringing eyes to the sport. So when a guy like Ronald Acuna goes out there and gets hurt, for the second time for a season-ending injury, it's just, it's heartbreaking not only, for baseball, but, for him because he wants to play the game. He had that fantastic season last year where he went 30-30. He was just, awesome player. So it really sucks to see him gone. I think the Braves will continue to be a fine baseball team. Chris Sale has been, great for him this year, career resurgence. But I don't know if you can expect them to do what they did last time because that team was a lot better last time. The Phillies have just been ridiculously good this year. So, it's always sad to see. And I hope that he makes a good recovery, and I hope that he can come back and do amazing things. But I guess we'll see with the Braves and just hope for him to get better soon.
In my opinion, there's always a threshold of what is a tolerable injury for your rivals. Oh, he jammed his thumb. Okay, you can celebrate that. But major injury. Oh,
yeah.
It just makes me. I hate it. It makes me cringe. No matter what team you cheer for.
Star wide receiver on their team starts having cramps. I'm not going to feel too bad, but I'm a little sad when I see guys like that go down for a long time. So.
All right, and so you pointed this out to me right before we went on the air. The last one we'll get into is Jorge Lopez. We're saying in the NL East, the New York Mets are bad. They're 22-33, and obviously had higher expectations given their payroll. Jorge Lopez gets a little controversy check swing. He looks over at the third base umpire and basically says, "Oh, that was a swing." It wasn't a swing. The third base umpire, maybe a short fuse, maybe not, throws him right out of the game. Jorge Lopez throws his glove into the stands and basically criticizes his teammates or his team as a whole. Oh, it's the worst bleeping team in the league. I mean, okay, the football side of me, the basketball side of me is like, okay, you got to be all in on your teammates. But isn't there an aspect of relief pitching? This guy's a relief pitcher. That's kind of, and really pitchers as a whole. Wouldn't you say there's an aspect that they're kind of in their own world? What's the connectivity on? You can relate this to the Royals. What's the connectivity within the team, and how important is it to have the team? Oh, we're all one team, guys. Not the bullpen guys, not the starting pitchers. Here's the fielders. What do you take away from Jorge Lopez just popping off at the mouth first? Secondly, how important is it to have that connectivity in order to have success?
Yeah. So, I mean, Jorge Lopez, that was awful. I hated, you get thrown out, you throw your gloves in the stand. That's one thing. You're too fiery. You got fired up. It's competitive nature. It's baseball. That's fine. Probably looked down upon, but it's not going to get you DFA'd. But when you go in the clubhouse and you talk about your team, as bad as the Mets are, as much as the Mets suck, you can't go in the locker room and say that your team is the worst team in baseball and, not taking any accountability for what happened on your own and what you did. So I think that, that's an awful move by him. I think he knew the repercussions of it. I don't think that he necessarily cared about the repercussions for whatever that says. And I hate to see, a player, regardless of their position, make those comments about their team because, as someone who's been where I've had the privilege of being in the Royals clubhouse and, kind of being around some of these players, you kind of pick up about the relationship that they have and the relationship that these players have, regardless of their position. You see guys like Brady Singer, Seth Lugo joking around, maybe not on start day because that's a whole different animal, but they're still in the clubhouse. They're still around. They're still having fun and talking to these guys. So when you're not, a team and you don't have teammates who are playing as teammates or see you as, kind of, at least when I played sports, we were always brothers. We were always family. So when you have a guy that's kind of out there on his own world, it just makes it harder for everyone to kind of buy into what you're selling, and buy into the journey that the team is trying to go on and to produce.
It's Austin Bidwell, and you're following him at Austin from KC on the Twitter machine, and you're reading all his great stuff at Inside the Royals. He's going to be covering the last game of the Minnesota Twins series today, and then it's turning it over back at home against the San Diego Padres. Next time we chat, it'll be the Guardians will be right there in your sights. Austin, what are you going to be looking for over the next 3 days, 4 days, the Padres series before you get into the Guardians as we get out of here?
Yeah, so I think first of all, today, you have to beat the Twins. You can't lose a series to the Twins, regardless if it's home or away. Splitting a series would be great. You got Brady Singer on the mound today, who has been fantastic through his first few games. He's had a couple shoddy appearances, but you get over those, and he's been great this season. So I think the Royals need to pick up a series win today, or a series split today. And going into the Padres series is a tough one because you know how good the Royals have been at home. They've been great, but it's going to be the back end of the rotation, which I think has been very good. Michael Wacha has had really great outings. You've had Alec Marsh have great outings, and you're getting guys back like Chris Bubich. All these guys that were going through minor league rehab are coming back. So that back into that bullpen and the back into that rotation is definitely getting better, is definitely coming back from injury. So you really want to win that series regardless of who steps on the mound and what part of your rotation you're in. And I think if the Royals can do that, they're in great setting and great standings going into the road trip against the Guardians. And they're right in position to take, the division with a great outing against Cleveland.
We'll talk to you next week, and we'll find out what's going on in that Cleveland series. We're going to be following you on Austin from KC and at Inside the Royals to find out how this Twin series finishes up and the results against the San Diego Padres. Austin, thanks so much for your time, man. Enjoy the day.
Absolutely.
That's Austin Bidwell joining us on the Joe Gaither Show, and we're going to close it out right here. We want to thank Blake Byler for joining us. Oh, my gosh, what an exciting time for Alabama basketball it is. And so, can we fast forward to November? We thank Blake Byler for joining us. You're following him at Blake Byler 45 on the Twitter machine. And we thank Austin Bidwell for joining us. You're following him at Austin from KC on the Twitter machine. Those guys giving us great expertise on the Joe Gaither Show. We appreciate you so much. We got another couple of subscribers. I appreciate you so much for downloading, rating, subscribing to the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or Amazon. You've watched the show on the BamaCentral YouTube channel, on my YouTube channel at Joe Gaither 6, on all my social medias on Facebook and Twitter as well. So I appreciate everybody tuning in for another edition of the Joe Gaither Show right here on BamaCentral and BamaCentral.com.
Thanks for joining us on today's edition of the Joe Gaither Show on BamaCentral. Keep up with Joe on all his social media pages at Joe Gaither 6. Subscribe, rate, and review the show on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and be sure to read us daily at BamaCentral.com.